Welcome. My name is Alex Alberro. I teach art history here and history photography. And thanks for attending today's ISLAA Colloquium, the Reconstructing the Real conference. The conference is sponsored by the Columbia University Department of Art History and Archaeology, as well as the Institute for the Study of Latin American Art, or ISLAA. This is our 12th ISLAA Colloquium at Columbia. We're very happy with the partnership and plan to continue many more moving forward. Today's event stems from the research of my esteemed colleague, co-organizer Jerónimo Duarte-Riascos, who's a scholar of modern and contemporary Latin American art, literature, and culture. Professor Duarte-Riascos' research, teaching, and curatorial projects concentrate on interdisciplinary practices that thematize the perception, communication, and construction of communal experiences of the real, which anchors the conference. He's an assistant professor of Latin American and Iberian cultures here at Columbia. He'll introduce the overall theme of today's event, as well as our two moderators. Please help me in welcoming Professor Duarte-Riascos.
Um, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. And thanks, Alice, for the introduction. Before I say a few words about the conceptual framework of our gathering today, I want to reiterate my gratitude to everyone who made this event possible, to the ISLAA team and their unwavering support to Latin American art, to the Department of Art History and Archaeology for hosting us and their assistance with logistics, and to Professor Alberro for inviting me to collaborate and for serving as a mentor in many other instances. To my department, the Department of Latin American and Iberian Cultures, in particular to our brilliant PhD students, Luiza Maceda and Luiza de Abreu Claudio, who worked tirelessly to make this conference happen. And last but not least, to our distinguished guests, Rosângela, Thyago, Rolf, Heidi, and Claire. I'm delighted to have you here with us and humbled by your generosity to share your work and ideas with us. So a little bit about where this comes from. When we first contacted our panelists, we invited them to speak about the somewhat loose topic of the reconstruction of the real through artistic practices. And as Professor Alberro said, something that I've been thinking about for a while. And we were interested in exploring the various ways in which contemporary artists and scholars grapple with what is arguably a long Latin American propensity to use fiction art to construct, divide, solidify, and intervene what we experience as real. Seldom understood as the opposite of reality, fiction has functioned uniquely in Latin America as a tool for interpretation, planning, and execution. And this blurring of the traditional ontological opposition has consequently been productively explored and exploited by both art and politics in the region. And we saw in the work of our guests compelling practices to better understand this phenomenon, to elucidate and produce forgotten archives, to critically introduce alternative cosmologies, to engage with the ephemeral creation of experimental communities, and to consider the disruptive power of artistic interventions. We invited Rosângela, Thyago, Claire, and Heidi and Rolf from Mapa Teatro to share with us their thoughts, works, and practices connected to these issues, to expand on them, contradict us, and take us in new directions. And we are very glad that they so enthusiastically responded to our call. And I want to stop there because you're not here to listen to me speak. But before I do, I want to briefly introduce our two panel moderators and discussants today. I'll say a few more words about Luiza Maceda in the beginning of the second panel in the afternoon. The first panel, in which Rosângela Rennó and Thyago Nogueira will participate, will be moderated by Ana Luisa de Abreu Claudio. Ana Luisa is a PhD student in Latin American and Iberian cultures department here at Columbia. She studies photography, visual arts, archives, and collective memories. In particular, she's interested in the connections between feminist Latin American visuality, activism, and the geopolitical imagination, with special attention to the Amazonian territory. Before joining Columbia, Luiza worked as an art education curator for over 16 years in a wide range of institutions. She has developed multiple educational and curatorial projects across Brazil and abroad, including spaces in the US, Europe, and the Middle East. She coordinated the Department of Social Action at the Instituto Moreira Salles for almost a decade. So please join me in welcoming Luiza, who will also introduce our first panelist today. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I will be one of the moderators today. We will hear here a presentation from Rosângela Rennó and Thyago Nogueira for this session. This very time subject turns to reflections on visualities, archives, memories, and thoughts about imaginaries of reality. We will have the chance to reflect on perspectives that work from Latin America. First of all, I would like to present Rosângela Rennó, who is a visual artist who lives and works in Rio de Janeiro. Rennó obtained her degree in fine arts from the Escola Guinar in Belo Horizonte in 1986 and in architecture from the Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais in 1987. In 1997, Rennó obtained her arts doctorate from the School of Communication and Arts of the Universidade de São Paulo. For the end of the 80s until the present day, Rosângela has developed artistic works acting on photography's lines that question the production of the images, the presence, and the possible disappearance of the same. Rosângela Rennó applies the same work system to text and all the visuals as to images. From intertextuality, it's possible to perceive the projection of the photography act in her works, especially in the way she questioned the idea of truth present in the image. As in the video installation Daily Mirror from 2001, where the artist is the main character of the video and gives her opinion about the challenge of understanding and translating other people's experience to transform them into a history. Using the veil metaphor, Rosângela invites the viewers to reflect on how many realities can fit in an image or a newspaper story. The photography images in Rosângela's works are sometimes ghosts that haunt, sometimes familiar, to the point of representing an extension of the spectator's reality. According to Rosângela, she prioritizes working with photography with an index. Hence, she counterpoints digital photography that is born without a specific body. The artist is a curious researcher who enjoys being in the field, walking through archives and other people's memories, rephotographing, and inviting photographers to multiply the multiple possibilities of seeing. The results are works that communicate the third person, instigating reflection on the realms of memory and the image of the self and the other. Please welcome. Now I will present Thyago Nogueira, who is the head of the Contemporary Photography Department at the Instituto Moreira Salles, Rio de Janeiro, and editor of the Brazilian photographic magazine Zoom. He has curated numerous exhibitions, including Claudio and The Yanomami Struggle, Instituto Moreira Salles, 2019, Fondation Cartier pour l'Art Contemporain Paris, 2020, and The Shed, New York, 2023. Daido Moriyama, a retrospective, Instituto Moreira Salles, 2022. Miguel Rio Branco, Crossed, Dreamed, Torn, Stolen, Used, Bled Words, 2022. And William Eggleston, American Color, Instituto Moreira Salles, 2015. As curator of contemporary photography, Thyago was responsible, together with his team, for bringing the disturbances caused by contemporary photography, with its accumulation of images, diversity of looks, and fields of action, such as the exhibition Corpo a Corpo, and Claudio and Duarte-Riascos struggle, which somehow inaugurated the possibility of looking at things that until then occupied the streets more than formal space of the museums. Besides exhibitions, Thyago joins an interest in books, publishing, and photography. What can be seen in the work that materialized in the editorial project of the photography magazine Zoom at Moreira Salles Institute. In addition, Thyago's curatorship and the photography themes promoted interdisciplinarity and co-authorship in the exhibition's cultural programming, a gain for the museum and the public. According to Thyago, being a curator is like being a biologist in the Amazonia rainforest because he is constantly excited by diversity of things. He thinks it's essential to work hard to explore the images and find solutions to narrate the ideas from the other. Engaging with the accumulation of contemporary images, he doesn't feel that there is an excess of images, words, sounds, or languages. As a curator, it can always be a challenge to deal with the images and the artwork of the others. Thyago thinks, quote, it's always a matter of stopping, slowing down, looking, and thinking carefully about what you see, and invite people to do the same, end of quote. Please join with me. Welcome, Thyago.
Yes. Well, I would like to thank you all for being here, and it's a pleasure for me to share some of my works with you. And I would like to thank the Department of Art History in partnership with the Latin American Iberian Culture Department and ISLAA also, and especially to Ana Luiza and Jerónimo for the invitation and for the wonderful presentation. Thank you. And you have to forgive me for my kind of Google and DeepL translation sometimes, and then please, I hope I can be clear enough talking about some works that I've chosen to bring here. When I received the invitation to talk about my work, I wondered what could be a good contribution for the researchers here in Colombia. And one of the things that, I would love to explain why I decided to talk about maps. And I think that usually the artists always prefer to talk about the most recent works, the freshest, isn't it? And my latest work is the one I am redesigning right now, involves the creation of a diagram for path guidance within a very large photographic work that will exist only in a book, not physically in a space. And but when you look at the diagram that I create, that I will show only at the end of that presentation, and when you look at the diagram, the viewer will think that he or she is looking at something that looks very much like a world map, but in fact, it's not a world map. This world map that I will show you later, in this specific case, is a drawing that emerged as a result of a specific practice of compiling and ordering images found on internet. And then it has the shape of a world map, but it doesn't work as a world map. So I decided to talk about maps, or rather works that involve the presence or the creation of a map. Mapping a city or a country or the whole world is a practice that has been part of my journey as an artist for a long time. Maybe it is a recurring action in my life because I like to understand spaces and territories. Also, maybe because it has to do with architecture also. But I feel that that it is something that works for me as a structural element for certain projects that depend on field research, especially when the conceptual and physical territory are unknown to me. Then maps become tools in different levels. Building maps is a method of learning. In the same way that, for me, dealing with photographic archives and compiling images to build archives are also ways of learning, both about human nature and its relationship with the photographic representation. Sorry. However, maps or the action of mapping can occur at different stages of the process of building or creating a work. The map can be a starting point or it can be the result of a project, in my case. It can be a guide or it can be a construction purpose. Then mappings do not follow a single method for me, not a single formulation. Well, I want to show you a very old work, a work that I did in '97, and called United States Mexican series in Tijuana, in the border between the United States and Mexico. And I will begin to explain the reason of this map that was a kind of presentation of the project. In '97, I wrote this text. Know as the place where the homeland begins, or donde empieza la patria, Tijuana is the most northwestern city in Mexico, with a population made up of more than 50% of immigrants. Sorry. In this urban landscape, squeezed against the fence that separates it from the neighboring United States of America, there is a mix of people from all 32 Mexican states and also from Central America countries. There are those who stay there, waiting for the ideal moment to cross the border illegally, but there are many more who work. For this is one of the most prosperous cities in the country. I don't know if Tijuana has the same status anymore, but this was written a long time ago. Paradoxically, Tijuana's identity is the lack of identity of a people that flirts with what is on the other side of the border, and at the same time is the strongest manifestation of Mexicanidad. Walking through the streets of Tijuana in the first residence held in '96 for the binational project called Insight, I saw through a large display window the portraits of people from the local society made by Eduardo Cepeda. Is that the on the top there is some photographs in the secretary of Eduardo Cepeda's studio. They were portraits made with great technical mastery and had, besides, a curious quality. They seemed like immemorial portraits, not anachronistic, but without any trace that could locate them in time. They were mostly done in the studio with scene objects chosen by the clients who realized there some puerile fantasies most of the times. I decided that Cepeda, who came from the state of Nayarit, would be my interlocutor, my intermediary in carrying out the human mapping of the city. I proposed to him to photograph people in the streets contacted by me. The idea was to document the eternal moment of chosen people from all Mexican states in their workplaces. Only one of them came to the studio to be photographed by Cepeda in the studio. Again, from the text from '97. The physical and economical barrier established between the two countries creates a zone of density on the Mexican side, translated by a sensorial storm in Tijuana. Profusion of colors, people, flavors, smells, sound, heat, sex, etc. Tijuana seems to seduce the neighbor through the amplification of Mexican natural attributes, deliberately exploiting the naivety and the senses of the other. This game could never work without a whole contingent of immigrant workers who are the ones who make, season, feed, color, and offer this cultural melting pot. And well, these are the portraits that Eduardo Cepeda did for me. And most of them, of course, in the place where people work, which was not very easy for him. He didn't like he thought it was very easy, very simple images. But at the end, I liked a lot the effects and then lots of colors. And this is the place where I showed the work, later in the facade of the Children's Museum in San Diego. Then I did the whole project in Tijuana and crossed the border with the photos and installed in the windows of the Children's Museum. Well, Biblioteca is another project that was created to exercise the fusion between three methods of keeping and exposing objects of a photographic nature, a hybrid and private system that I created that links the museum, the archive, and the library. Basically, it is a collection of 100 albums, slide boxes, and photographic negatives organized, arranged, and enclosed within 37 display tables, divided into 10 groups. These groups are like continents, where each display table content is related to its neighbor, like kind of countries organized in continents. The viewer can interact with Biblioteca in three different but complementary ways. At first, as in a museum, he can walk around the space looking at the display tables and imagining through their disposition the relations between them, and between the content of the tables. However, the viewer cannot touch the albums or even see their photos inside. The Biblioteca includes world map. This we have one small one on the wall. Includes a world map where numbered pins show the locations where the objects were acquired, while giving us the first clues about what lies behind the 5 colors used in the display tables. There are 5 colors involved in the tables, in the structure and on the backgrounds of the tables. Dedicating a little more time to the Biblioteca through observation of the world map, the viewer can understand the diaspora of the albums and images. This sends him back to the display tables for a more careful analysis of their contents. Although, unfortunately, this is restricted to their sides through the glasses because you cannot see anything inside because there is a museum idea that you don't never touch the object. You can see the object by the sides of the display tables. A file cabinet with 2 drawers contain the numbered cards that correspond to each album, where the viewer finds information about the 100 collections objects, which means 100 visual narratives that the viewer can never see. With more time and more dedication, the viewer can consult the cards and go deeper into the history of each album and into the diaspora of the photographs. At this point, we could think that the viewer becomes also a reader of the Biblioteca. And there is also a small book called the Biblioteca, also, with about 400 photographs extracted from those albums that suggest a kind of condensation of all the narratives into a single one, as if passing finally from the archive to the library, and which is the word for biblioteca in English. And I will pass now jump some years to Rio Montevideo project done between 2011 and 2016. And Well, in Rio Montevideo, there is not exactly a map, but a road, a kind of mental road between two cities. The one where I live and the other whose history I don't know well, but which coincides with a kind of fog that covers my childhood memories in Brazil, which is Montevideo, in the capital of Uruguay. In 1973, Aurelio González, the chief photographer of El Popular, the newspaper of the Uruguayan Communist Party, hid its entire photographic archive, consisting of almost 5,000 negatives, 50,000 negatives, between the walls of its office building. A couple of days later, the newspaper was destroyed by the militaries, who established the dictatorship in Uruguay 9 years after the beginning of the dictatorship in Brazil. Aurelio was exiled for 12 years, but the hidden negatives disappeared for more than two decades. The negatives were rescued only in 2006, and now they are still in the process of digitalization in the Center of Centro de Fotografía de Montevideo. These images constitute an invaluable visual record of the years of economic downturn and public unrest preceding the military coup, a period which bears almost no photographic witnesses. For the presentation of Rio Montevideo, I used 20 slide projectors of varying formats, models, and eras found in the flea markets of Montevideo and Rio. That's why also there is this connection between Rio and Montevideo. These projectors offer a mechanical analogy to the materiality and endurance of El Popular's negatives, a quality I feel is now lost in the age of digital disposal. The projectors were operated by the visitors, who manually triggered individual bulbs to expose each slide. As a result of this, of these interactions, the ever-changing sequence of images on the walls offers viewers new and diverse readings and connections. I have chosen a variety of subjects amongst the photos from El Popular. Let's see, I have some other views. This was the installation of Rio Montevideo in the Photographers Gallery in London in 2016. The project began a little smaller, and then I included six projectors for the presentation in London. I have chosen a variety of subjects amongst the photos from El Popular. Pictures of boxing and football matches, religious ceremonies, demonstrations, and armed confrontations between the military police and protesters in the central streets of the capital. By focusing these visual memories, I was seeking to address elements of the phenomena of national amnesia surrounding historical events born out of the censorship imposed by dictatorial regime of that time. And this is a kind of it's a reproduction of the plates that go together with the slide projectors, showing how each image has been indexed inside the system, the archiving system of the Centro de Fotografía de Montevideo. That's why I like the idea of having something, like a kind of code way of showing this image because they became archival stuff at the end. Now I will show you some images of the Rio Tópico in Construção, which is a project that I did together with Thyago Nogueira, my curator, in the Instituto Moreira Salles in Rio. And I have to tell a little the story about the project. You have to control me. Okay. Well, between 2016 and 2017, Rio Tópico became my first real large-scale collaborative project developed with Thyago Nogueira in Rio for the Instituto Moreira Salles. 50 young people from different regions of Rio were asked to photograph their neighborhoods and investigate its history, usually a narrative of expulsion and occupation, unofficially recorded in the minds of the elderly. The plan was to map places in the city of Rio that had utopian names, such as Enchanted Valley, Hope Village, Paradise Garden, Wonderland, House of Dreams, these kind of names that are very common. A giant map of Rio was installed on the gallery floor, identifying our targets, the utopian places or the dreaming places. Then the map here was the very beginning of the project. Everything began by this map. We began with two groups of photographers from Rio's periphery who worked in two different moments of the project process. Neighborhood associations, social networks, street posters, and sound car were also used to promote the project and increase contributions. I was moved to map Rio in response to the general invisibility of its poor areas, 9 in 10 parts of Rio, actually. Places difficult to access due to the barricades, drug dealers, or militias who don't allow you to come inside. Even if you can visit some of these places, you are not free to photograph, unless if authorized by the local power, not officially, of course. Since the 60s, when the government began demolishing the favelas in the South Zone and constructing huge cohabs like Cidade de Deus in North or West Zone, Rio is considered a divided city. My interest was to create a kind of photographic map of the city and highlight specific areas where the citizens live in very harsh conditions by a complete lack of public policies. Few places remained not photographed at the end of the show. The map of the city, drawn on the gallery floor, helped the viewers to visualize the scale of the city and to recognize the difference between the well-known iconic Rio and the rest, almost unseen and sometimes forgotten Rio de Janeiro. Well, I have to pass more faster right now because we had a lot of contributors. So I'm okay, right? Okay. And there is a wonderful book. We have to talk about it and published by the Instituto Moreira Salles. If you want to have a better view of all the works photographed by 50 collaborators during the whole process. Yeah, and this now after the image, we come back inside the space where you have the map, the map of the city of Rio installed on the floor, and at the entrance of the gallery, you have the iconic Rio, which means when you come inside the space, you have the iconic Rio on your back. And then because it's like coming inside the 9 in 10 parts of Rio that most of tourists don't know. My interest was to create a kind of photographic map of the city and highlight specific areas where the citizens live. Oh, I'm sorry, I have already told that. In December 2017, the exhibition was opened with a little less than 350 photos. On the 3rd of April of 2018, the exhibition counted 109 photos, beside 38 aerial views of the city and 50 plates with short texts about the 50 chosen places with dreamlike names. Yeah, this is to give you an idea how the exhibition was organized. You know, like you had this aerial photographs with the texts, And the photos that arrived, they went up the walls in four stages, and according to the contribution of people that came through the four phases of the project. And then here you can see you have a kind of evolution of the work on the wall. You have the first stage, second, in the third or fourth, I don't remember. And the idea was also emulate also the how say the growth of the city, yeah, and on the wall, like sometimes uncontrollable in most of the biggest cities in Brazil, and not only Brazil, in the South global. And Eau de Colonie. Eau de Colonie was it's another project I did. Yeah, do I have time for two? Right. And Eau de Colonie. I have to talk a little about a story about this project. In 2020, a residence in the city of Cologne, Germany, which was cancelled due to the COVID pandemic, turned into a long online research project. This was my second experience doing a lot of research online. The initial objective was to work with archival photographs of the industries in the Rhine and Westphalia region. However, due to the impossibility of visiting and handling the archive, I ended up researching the only topic I knew which could yield interesting relationships with other parts of the world: the history of the elixir that was named later water, the Cologne water. This is the only thing that I knew that, okay, let's go ahead, because I cannot see anything else from this huge file, this huge archive. My project began with a question. What is there that exists between a Roman colony in Cologne, and an object of desire and consumption, aside from their name as a common denominator? A very long history, a history of more than 300 years. Actually, a very long history of piracy, perhaps the most successful piracy event in the whole world. And it's really amazing, the whole story. If you want to go deep, I recommend, because it's a wonderful and fascinating history. And I will share my text with you, the wall texts with you, that not to be lost in lots of information that involve this project. Sometime in the late 17th century, a number of bottles of aqua mirabilis arrived in Cologne, brought over by some Italian merchant. Thus, the story began. About half a century later, this marvelous water, aqua mirabilis, already produced in the city, was nicknamed Eau de Cologne by French soldiers, and it became an object of desire. Everybody does, okay, if you go to Cologne, you have to bring me some Eau de Cologne. That's the story. But it was actually a nickname, because the name was Aqua Mirabilis. Thus began the saga of an elixir that was subsequently taken to every continent on Earth. Not only the original, but a lot of copies. A product that accompanied European colonization and was viralized and cannibalized in so many ways that it transformed from a luxury item into an object of consumption for all social classes, and then into a generic term for perfume. That's the story of the saga of the Eau de Cologne. A discovery I did. In the city of its birth, the transformation of the therapeutic elixir into a perfume took just over a century. However, in many parts of the world, Eau de Cologne has always maintained all the functions, in addition to simply enchanting the sense of smell, whether they be therapeutic, sanitary, esoteric, or magical. like the curses that adhere to a product or object and span centuries forever and ever. It's very funny because during the COVID, I saw a lot of advertisings in internet saying that the colonia, the Turkish colonia, written with K, was great to kill the virus. And then they used to sell in bottles big like that. This was the destiny of the old Cologne that became the Turkish colonia, big bottles to kill COVID, to kill the virus. I'm not kidding. Haute Cologne Les Origines is a timeline under construction in which the gaps are just as important as the image that comprise it at this exact moment. In this timeline, the routes, this is the timeline on the wall. In this timeline, the routes traveled by the water from Cologne are more relevant than the identity of its creator, which has been so questioned for over 300 years. It is a well-known fact that since the 18th century, a family name very common in Italy, Farina, has strongly driven the counterfeiting industry to the point that dissemination of the coveted product became uncontrollable. Even with so many gaps, the timeline exemplifies the efficiency of some models of colonization, from the times of the great navigations down to the present day, confirming that Cologne and colonies have always been an excellent business. Well, and now the second part of the project is related to Eau des Colonies en construction. We devised a survey to be conducted among citizens of 133 countries who, at some point in their history, experienced the condition of colony of another country. These individuals could be asked to opine on which aromas best represent their respective homelands, taking into account not only the natural, genuine aromas of the place, but also the artificial or exotic scents, possibly inherited from their colonizers after years, decades, or even centuries of symbiosis, dependence, plunder, and exploitation. Until the survey, I will keep this one still. Until the survey is given and completed, the Eau des Colonies en construction collection will remain in a latent state. Each bottle that you see in detail here, whose volume corresponds proportionally to the territorial extension of the country it represents, occupies a precise place on the world map according to the Gall-Peters projection. The bottles, which contain only the alcohol base, await the complement of 6% of the essence of fragrance to be produced. In each case, based on the answers to the question, what aroma best defines your country today? This eccentric exercise in cartometry also includes the 65 portions of land which have remained territories governed by some other distant country, supposedly out of mutual convenience. People from these lands also deserve to be heard, in my opinion. Well, and then now I finish with the project that I was talking in the beginning. Good apples, bad apples. This large-scale installation, I have only two details here. Well, this large-scale installation spread across the walls of the gallery includes over 700 small printed photos found on internet, handwritten and framed, all showing monuments dedicated to Lenin, the communist leader, in different countries. In some cases, photos collected of the same monument present a visual narrative describing what happened to the monument over the years. All the narratives and photos with handwritten are arranged in alphabetical order according to the names of the cities where the sculptures appear, thus interrupting geopolitical norms. What I have to explain you is the installation was organized from the letter A to the letter Z, and by in the alphabetical order by the city, and then there was no organization by continent. And when you had, for instance, the story of the destruction of a monument, the story of the history of this, the destruction of this monument through the photographs I found on the internet is shown in the column. And then you have when you have just 2 or 3 photos in this line, means that I have just few photographs from that monument. And sometimes I have lots of photos from the same monument in different stages from the construction until the destruction or resignification of the monument also. And it was a very complex research. And and now let me go back to the text. In some cases, photos collected of the same monument present a visual narrative describing what happened to the monument over the years. All the narratives in photos with handwritten are arranged in alphabetical order according to the names of the cities where the sculptures appear. The state of the monument is arranged by the color of the frame. Red for representations of a monument in its original place. Black for those that have sustained some level of vandalism, and white for the monuments somehow resignified. Accompanying the colors of the frames, stamps with apple drawings provide a subjective valuation of the figure of Lenin. The good apple for the myth or the legend, and the rotten apple for the shameful or the infamous monument. These were actually metaphors from my childhood memories of Brazilian military dictatorship that I intentionally inverted. I have to explain that I spent all my childhood listening that the communists are the rotten apples, the bad apples that you have to take out from the basket because they contaminate the good apples. This was the same. And then I wanted to change the key and invert the key. The white apple stamps are for the resignified Lenin monuments. Sometimes, I don't know if it's the right word, museified, we can say that, or transformed into a museum piece or art sculpture, a relic not related only to Lenin, but placed in the history, in the art history. Well, the decision to make a book about this project fell upon the need to make some changes in the arrangement between the images. Besides, it seemed fundamental to me to offer the project a new geopolitical configuration, transforming the whole group of photographs into a huge collage in the shape of a world map. That new display could also highlight the differences in socio-political behavior between neighboring societies in relation to icons from their socialist past. Curiously, what appeared because this was the map, the world map constructed, and what was amazed for me, it was something that happened during the construction. When you see the gray area in the almost in the middle of the map, what appeared almost in the center was the set of the group of photos of monuments photographed in Ukraine, which became a kind of tragic but emblematic coincidence. That's something that I didn't control when I realized Ukraine was in the center of the whole thing. I think that this is, I'm sorry that I hope I could explain well. This is not a very easy project too. Actually, this is the first time I explained about good apples, bad apples in English. And then, yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for this invitation and the opportunity to be part of this exciting panel. I'd like to thank the Department of Art History, Archaeology, and ISLAA for organizing the symposium. I was really excited to learn about the themes and the ideas of involved in this talk. And also like to thank Alberro, Jerónimo, Ana Luiza, and Luis Malceda for hosting me and welcoming so well here at Columbia University. So my name is Thyago Nogueira. I'm the head of Contemporary Photography Department in Instituto Moreira Salles, Brazil. And then Ana Luiza had asked me just to give a very short overview of our activities before I talk a little bit more about a specific project that I did and I was presented here in New York that has a very, I think, strong relation with this idea of realism, real myths, fiction, real communities, fictional communities, and I think things that are discussed in this talk. But this is the museum where I work. I'm the head of the Contemporary Photography Department there. And this department is in charge of thinking the way that, or building ways for the institution to think about contemporary image making and the circulation of images. And this is done through a different series of activities we develop. One is the publication of a magazine called Zoom, which is now in its 24th issue. This is just an example of the current issue, but it's a magazine where we tackle different stories around photography, video, circulations of images with portfolios, but also writings, translations, interviews. And these are some of the artists of the issue. Wida Sodoma, this one, an indigenous artist, very interesting, also dealing with this idea of mixed realities. This is Greta Safarti. The other activity we develop is a grant that we give to 2 artists every year. So we're now on the 10th edition of our grant. And we are actually presenting an exhibition about that grant right now. We also started a collection of contemporary photography and video that has, as you can see, photographs, installations, videos, books, and archives. And these are just some of the artists that are now part of the collection. Rafael Biquir, a very interesting movie maker in Brazil. João Castilho. Sofia Borges. I've selected some that had some relation with this idea of fictionalized reality. And Letícia Ramos. And also part of the department is also involved in organizing exhibition. And this is an exhibition that we just opened on the 1st of April in Brazil, spanning the 10th anniversary of the grant that we give. So presenting all the projects that were developed with the institution during this 10 years, about 20 artists and collectives working together. And it's very interesting because these are long-term projects that during 1 year we develop together with the artists inside the institution. So the curatorial department is involved, but also production, conservation, the digital department. There are many, I think it's very good for the institution to learn from the artists directly and work with them in developing their projects. And this is the first time we present all of them together. So you can see an artist book done by Castiel Vitorino and an installation panel done by Valde Souza. These are the works from Sofia Borges and also Igi Aydun. Just another exhibition I did when we opened the museum in São Paulo around the idea of the body as an instrument and a tool for political change. It's called Body Against Body. And there was a very interesting project because we managed to feature live transmissions inside of the exhibition. There was a moment in Brazil in 2017 where we were having a lot of protests, a lot of demonstrations on the streets, and we worked with a collective of news media to broadcast from all over Brazil what they wanted inside of the show. In this, I think, around 15 screens that were spread and scattered around the show. But what I want to talk here, let me just look at the time, sorry. Okay, thank you. Is this project has been a long-term research and actually transforming all the time, which is a research I've been doing on the archive and the legacy of Claudio, a very important artist in Brazil. She's now 92 years old. She's an immigrant from Europe. Actually, she's a survivor of the Holocaust. She flew from Europe in 1946 with her mother and actually came to New York, where she lived for 10 years, studied at the Hunter College, and moved to Brazil in 1955. And it was in Brazil that she decided to take photography. She said that she felt ruthless, that she needed to communicate with people and establish some relations in her new country. So she took photography and started to photograph and travel around. And eventually it became a profession. She became a journalist and started to do different portfolios. And I just wanted to introduce to one of the, I think, very early portfolios where Claudio was saying, I wanted to understand the reality of the country, the social relations and the complexities. And so she proposed to live with 4 different families in different parts of Brazil, very different parts of Brazil, to understand, the social relations, their the culture and the differences within Brazil also. So this is a family, a farmer's family from Bahia, a northeast state. This was a family that she spent also time in São Paulo. And this is a family, a very, very simple family in the coast of São Paulo, where she also lives. So the idea was, interestingly enough, was to dive into that reality and live with the family for some days or weeks in certain cases to try to understand all these dynamics and photograph. She spoke not so good Portuguese at that time, and she said photography was a language that I found to establish these connections. And this was another very religious family in Minas Gerais. And thinking about reality, I think one of the biggest and one of the most important opportunities Claudia had at that time was to work in this magazine called Realidade, which translates as reality. And it was a very important magazine created in 1966, right after the dictatorship in Brazil. It started in 1964. And it was a very interesting magazine because they invested a lot in journalism. They really invested in photography and image making. And they were really, the photographers and the artists were really free to develop their own features, their own ideas. They have, plenty of film, plenty of time. The writers, they didn't have to illustrate the features. The writers could also work, and the photographers could also work independently. So the magazine really gathered a generation of very interesting artists and photographers that could do new experimentations in the journalism. And I think Claudia started her publication in this magazine with this very interesting feature on the modernization of a small town in the south of Brazil that was, just had received a very modern hospital, but they didn't want to, the women didn't want to have their babies in the hospital. They wanted to continue to have their traditionally with the midwife. And so she photographed the story of this very important midwife that was still, giving birth to the babies in the cities. And of course, it was a magazine, and I think in this early beginning, Claudia was also connected to the history of social documentation and humanitarian photography. She was much inspired by Eugene Smith and I think other photographers from a more realistic tradition. This was also a very interesting essay that she did on, I'm sorry for the sensitive imagery, but it was a spiritual surgeon that was very popular, very famous all over Latin America, and people would come from all over the continent to have spiritual surgeries with him. And she went, of course, to see the surgery, to photograph the surgery, also working for the magazine. This was also a very interesting feature that she did around the deportation of immigrants from São Paulo state that didn't find job, and the prefecture at that time decided to give them food and a train ticket to go back to their countries, a very racist politics. And she decided to go and to join the trains and to go back to the different states with these people and photograph their routines in their journeys, actually, until they reach their countries. And this is just an overview of what Claudia was doing in journalism and her interest in documentation. She was circulating all over the country, working with indigenous people, usually photographing minorities, populations that were vulnerable, very interested in that, in what she called the vulnerability of the being. I think this is with an obvious connections to her own story. Yes, not sure if all of you know, but Claudia, part of her family was Jewish, and when she was living in Transylvania, her father's family were all taken to a ghetto and then to concentration camps and exterminated, and Claudia really escaped with her mother. And I think she, for many years, carried this trauma and the guilt for not being able to prevent that or stop that violence against her own family. And of course, she had to leave her own territory and find a new home and a new place. And I think she was very sensitive all over her life to this, people that were in a fragile situation. And it was through the Realidade magazine that she actually flew or went for the first time to the Yanomami territory and did this very, traditional but very affectionate photographs of the Yanomami in a reportage that was published in 1971 during the dictatorship. It was a special issue that was published by the magazine to talk about the plans of the dictatorship to develop, what they call developed, but invest in Amazonia. It was a big national plan. They launched a series of investment plans since the 70s. And the magazine was really worried and interested on that, so they did a very special issue around this with a lot of care, care for not touching how to deal with that in the dictatorship. You imagine we just had the institutional act that established a very rough, very hard censorship in 1968. And this is 1971. It was actually one of the last issues. Last issue for Claudia and last issue for many of the people that worked in the magazine because they were persecuted. They had to really work in different, more independent publications. But it was, so for me, the thing is, this project started when I met Claudia and I wanted to look at her archive, thinking about what an institution that takes care of archives in Brazil. We, not only on the contemporary collection, but we preserve different states, different archives of photographers. I think about 25 states, complete states, and around 2,500,000 photographic items. So it was how to think of an archive, how to tell the story of an archive, and also how to understand or repurpose that archive, how to understand the political relevance of that archive and what that archive stands for in its long term. So I approached Claudia to investigate that, to understand not only what she had done, but how she had evolved in her trajectory as an artist. The more she understood the Yanomami, the more time she spent with the Yanomami, because after the Realidade magazine, Claudia really quit her job in the city and decided that she wanted to embark in a very long-term project with the Yanomami. She started to fly to the Yanomami land, and she, at a certain moment, even moved to the Yanomami land and really dedicated and still dedicates her life to that cause. And so it was, I had two ideas at that moment, was really to understand, how she was transformed by that experience, photographically speaking, and also how I could say, also how I could recontextualize the political history of activism that Claudia collaborated but also headed in the 80s and 90s for the demarcation of the land that was not so at that moment, not so urgent and not so well known by the newer generations. There was a parallel history to the archive that was done not in the art context, but in the anthropological associations and the Congress and the political framework that was not totally, I think, visible, especially because when they achieved the demarcation of the Yanomami land in 1992, that I think that urgency kind of diminished. So the idea was to look at the whole framework and then build a project. And also it was my interest to, since we started to have more contact with the Yanomami people themselves directly, they were very isolated people living in the very northern part of Brazil, on the border with Venezuela. I thought it was interesting also to have this look, to understand with the others, culture and philosophy and cosmovision, how we could also look again at what Claudia had done and really understand these images from their own perspective. So it was a project to build together these different realities, let's say these multiple perspectives. And I think I've tried to present, I don't know if you had the chance to see the exhibition here at the Shed, but I tried to present that a little bit on the exhibition. I'll just show some images here, but it's really when we, I looked at, Claudia has about maybe 30,000 images. I looked at every single image that she did and actually reorganized them chronologically to try to find these differences and these changes in her work. And so what I see is, the first image, initial images of Claudia is she's photographing with black and white, walking in the forest. She's received by a Yanomami group in the Katrimani region, and she's observing the daily life and activities of the women, of the men, the hunts, the expeditions, the foraging, and little by little she starts to do interventions on the photography image, I think, to try to express and show, in a way, make visible the experience and the feelings that she was having while inside of the Yanomami territory. In this case, this previous case, she was using Vaseline, kind of an oil, petroleum jelly on the lens of the camera, to also to suggest, as you may know, that the Yanomami have a very strong relation with the sky. The sky is made of very different layers, and even the forest has grown on a previous sky that has fell in the ancient times. So I think Claudia was sensing that, or learning a little bit about this when she was doing these initial images on the forest, and was trying to make that visible to an audience outside of the Yanomami land. I also created these dialogues in the exhibition and in the project between Davi Kopenawa's words and Claudia's works. Davi Kopenawa is the main spokesperson for the Yanomami, a very important shaman and leader. And my idea was not to make an illustration of his words, but really try to offer other dimensions to what her photography meant at the time. So these are the initial images that she was doing. There are different relations that we can establish with the spirituality of the Yanomami, the idea of the Shapiri. There are the spiritual beings, the double images of everyone that exists in the earth, and that shamans invoke to learn from them during their dreams or during their trance, to learn from them and to organize society, or to ask for fertility, for rain, for to save people to heal people from diseases. And then also Claudia starts to use infrared film, which at that moment was a very popular, very important technique used by the military to survey the land in aerophotography. And I find it very interesting that she was subverting that technique and instrumentalizing it to suggest a more oniric and more dreamlike experience to the Yanomami territory. You see here she's photographing a rain moving through the Amazonian forest. There is also very important, considerations of Davi about the spirit of fertility. There is this rain and humidity that circulates in the forest with the movement of the Shapiri spirits. You see here, for instance, an aerial view of Claudia's of the Katrimani region. But again, you think about the military technique. But I was looking at these images, and with all these conversations around climate change. The heating of the earth and etc. I think she gives a very palpable and very clear, visible dimension to that. These are some images also using infrared. There are all these very interesting relations about the original women that was fished from the river by the demiurges of the Yanomami people. I'm not going to have time to read and to talk about specifically about each image, but it's just really thinking about the real. For me, it was how do we, I think in this case, Claudia was trying, to how do you call it, relativizar, she was great, she was trying to make, question what is reality, what's visible, what's not visible, and what photography can do in terms of reality. And photography is essentially a tool to register reality. It has this very complicated lexical nature. And I think Claudio was really trying to, learning from an indigenous cosmovision and perspective, she was challenging her own language of work to build a different perspective and a different photographic imagination. And you see that she's progressively entering also the collective houses, being more intimate and being more transcendent in what she's photographing. This is one of the collective houses of the Yanomami. She's then also using filters, color filters, to change her black and white images. This is a very interesting image because she's photographing just a very banal scene inside of which is a child looking at her. But because of the sun, the light that filters from the ceiling and all this outline, you can really connect these images to the spiritual beings of the Yanomami. The ways they see this, David recalls these beings as looking like very small men, like childs that fluctuate in the sky of the Maloca through the spider webs, so very shiny spider webs, and that the shaman invoke when they are in their rituals to inhabit their chest and talk to them. It's in a way the way they learn. It's when they're dreaming and they're bringing the shapirs down to the Maloca and discussing with them what they're going to do. And also it's the shapir that guides their image to access other realities, other dimensions, and other levels of the reality. So the work of Claudia is really, I think, how photography can do that and can represent that invisible to us aspect of the reality, and how we can spend the technology to go beyond the idea of just being an indexical representation of the world. And then, very interestingly, she's participating in the funerary rituals and the shamanic rituals, and she's developing different techniques to photograph each of those rituals. In this case, using the slow shutter speed to give this connective affection to the women during the women's chant, or using the multiple exposure of the film to suggest, in a way, the repetition of this is a specific ceremony where they offer food and you have to eat and eat and eat, and you drink until you vomit. You cannot really refuse the access of food. So I think she's also suggesting this. The movement, the chants, as I said, the circulation of the spirits and in the sky of the collective houses. So these are all, I think, this quest to access an indigenous experience and reality through photography. It gets more interesting, I think, also when Claudia she's a bit skeptical about photography's ability, to cover everything and to really represent it, and she starts to ask Yanomami people that didn't exist the idea of artists at that time, but Yanomami people to draw their own realities. And then what's interesting in these drawings, in this case done by Andrea Taniki, is that the different layers of the sky and the different layers of experience and existence, the mythological, the dreams, the people that exist, starts to inhabit the same drawing. So it's really, there is no separation in the Yanomami perspective of these different layers. There is nothing that we could call like reality or fiction or dream, or everything is part of the same moment and exists in the present and lives in the artistic representation. I find that, and I think it's very interesting to see clearly, even the shamanic, the mythological, what we would call the mythological demiurgs, Omama and Yoazi, the good guy, the bad guy. So it's, for instance, like, I think Andrea Taniki was representing the death of a person, Selina, and he's representing the funerary ceremony together with the spirits that are taking her to the sky, and the shapiris that are invoked to take care of her body. So everything really inhabits the same space, and is really visible to the shamans especially. So a woman giving birth, but also the sorcerers. So these are drawings by Nakishima, also on different aspects, the original myth of the seclusion of the women during the menstruation that actually generated all the people on earth because she ran away from the menstruation and then a big flood destroyed the earth. And it's a beautiful story that Omama took the different forms from this flood and put them in different parts of the earth, and that really generated different colors and different peoples that inhabit those parts of the earth. These are drawings by Vital Arasi. So this is one thing, which is a very imaginative story. In terms of Claudia, going back to her, there was a big tragedy in the Yanomami territory with the dictatorship progress in the region, and most of the people started to die because of the diseases and the construction companies that arrived in the territory. And so at that moment, Claudia really went back to, in a way, to her photojournalistic approach in photography and started to photograph and denounce the activities. It was also the moment where she partnered with Davi Kopenawa to really initiate this fight for the demarcation of the land, the continuous piece of land. It was a very hard reality moment. And I think that the images were less imaginative and proposing a different world, but really more images to denounce what was going on in the territory. In this case, for instance, was images that she did for the vaccination campaign that were used to identify and vaccinate people, but later were used in another project that she did called Marked, that was suggesting the relations between the extermination and the saving of people, connecting with their Jewish story. And I mean, this story ends with a very interesting, I think, also if we're thinking about how to deal with real and reality in photography, with a very interesting project she did was called the Yanomami Genocide Death of Brazil, which was in 1989 when the dictatorship wanted they were really pressed to demarcate the land and with all the denouncements. So they decided to do a demarcation that would demarcate the land in 19 isolated islands. They were called the Archipelago Demarcation. And of course, this was a way just to exterminate and asphyxiate the Yanomami. And what Claudia was working as an activist at that moment, she really had stopped photographs since the early 80s. And she was not, she didn't have images of what was going on in the land at that moment. So she decided to relook at her archive and rephotograph every single image that she had done and organize this in a continuous story that is presented in a protest exhibition in Brazil in 1989, narrating the beautiful harmonic living of the Yanomami in the forest and then the progressive extermination of them through the contact with non-indigenous civilization. And it was a very beautiful way, I think, that Claudia found to revive her images, to make them, to use her archive as an instrumental tool to operate in politics, but also to revive photography and get rid of the documentary and the factual, but really keep the photography. Even if she had done those photographs in the 70s, she was using them as if they were done in the present moment. It was really a way that she found to get rid of the documentarian, let's say, aspect of photography, the idea of time and place and specific situation, but reusing her archive over and over to make them, to keep the urgency of the image alive. And I think this is a way that she found, it's in a way what she's been doing until today with her archive. It's really a specific body of work that she did in the 70s and early 80s, but that she's been reusing over and over in a very present and very intense way. This is the Yanomami demarcation of the Yanomami territory. And so this was the project, looking at Claudia's archive to really understand how she was building a new reality, a new community, a new connection with the Yanomami, and how she was being instrumentalizing her images to fight a very difficult political situation in Brazil. But I think it's interesting to see also now that we have more Yanomami producing artworks and drawings on papers and also films and also photography, how those multiple perspectives can shift and can enhance our perception of this idea of a reality within indigenous context. So this, for instance, are drawings made by the shaman Davi Kopenawa. If you think the Uriria is what they call the earth forest, in a way it's the same representation that Claudio was trying to do with the pink forest. This is how Davi is, depicting the globe where we live, and then the lands. I don't know if you can, yeah. These are the origins of the languages, the idioms, the origins, the rivers, the trees, the roots that keep the earth grounded in its soil and stable, and also the land, in some cases being destroyed by mining, by cattle ranching, by logging. This is also a representation of the land that we live in, and with the Perimetral Norte Highway crossing the land, the mining, the settlements. So it's in the exhibition that I did here in New York, the idea was to put these multiple perspectives in conversation and in dialogue, presenting not only how Claudia, a non-indigenous Jewish woman, was looking at an indigenous society, but also how people from within the indigenous societies look at themselves, and also trying to really show the difference between the indigenous Yanomami themselves. Of course, they are not a coherent and uniform group of people. There are different artists, different perspectives, different experience. So in this case, Davi is a shaman. So he can really see the images in his dreams and depict those images, which is completely, for instance, this is the house of the spirits, or the Shapiri, which is every shaman has its own group of Shapiris that attend to him and that teach him. David talks a lot about these are his teachers, really. The University of the Forest has the Shapiri as teachers, and he invoked them during the rituals, and they teach him. Or the spirits of the Nape. Nape are the foreigners, the white people, and the people that are exploiting the minerals on the soil. And we now have, for instance, Mozaniel Iramari, who's the first Yanomami director, movie maker. He's doing a film on the Reahu ceremonies, the meeting of the shamans, the same space that Claudio was photographing with his, multiple exposure techniques, low shutter speed, using these flash lamps, oil lamps, really creating this new visual language for photography. But now we have Yanomami. I'm not going to show excerpts here, but we have a Yanomami movie director looking at this. We have this very interesting film also done by a group of Yanomami directors, which is a woman thinking on the experience of being a shaman. Most of the shamans are men, and it's a very beautiful film where she's looking at the man preparing the yakuana pounder to inhale during the shamanic rituals, and she's thinking, what would I feel if I would inhale that? What would I see if I were a shaman, if I could talk to the spirits, if I had my own shapiri? So it's also how within the Yanomami community there are these multiple, perspectives looking and trying to create a more complex reality. And then we have, for instance, Juana Yaira, so very interesting woman researcher. I think the first woman to draw on paper really to produce the art, but she's a researcher researching the rituals around the menstruation, but also the Yanomami knowledge from plants. And she's, again, if you remember Claudia's photographs of the collective houses from above, Juana is drawing her community and drawing the mountains of her region, which are considered the places where the Shapiri spirits live, very important sacred mountains. The activity of the women foraging in the forest. We also saw some of these in Claudia's images. And inside of the collective houses, doing the cassava bread or taking care of the children. But also drawing, this is women, I think, dressed up for the Reahu ceremonies, where they dress up and they paint themselves very beautifully. They use this very smelly, fragrant flowers and leaves. But also drawing things from like the Tueyoma, which is the original woman that was fished in the river by the Omama, the demiurge. And another film that we present there of women explaining how the traditional techniques of fishing with this timbo, which is a kind of a poisonous plant. Or for instance, we also have in the exhibition José Camocajesi, which is a translator and also a professor, but also it's very interesting because José is not a shaman himself, but he's gathering the stories of the shamans in his communities and the images that the shamans see and trying to depict them in different drawings as a way to transmit the realities. And this, for instance, is a very interesting series of drawings explaining the different layers of the sky, of the Yanomami sky. So you have here, I don't know if you can see here, this is the underground, which is the original sky really fell, destroyed everything that was on Earth, and every being that lived here is, living in the underground as these monsters that eat flesh and evil spirits that the shaman send to the underground. Then I think this is the level where we live. Now this is the ground level where we live, with the activities that we see here. And this when a person dies in this level, they are sent to the back of the sky, which is this level, which is in a way a parallel dimension to our sky, because it's the same person living the same. It's a place where they have plenty of food, feasts, everyone is happy and celebrating. So all the relatives are living in that dimension, and then when you die in that dimension, you enter the furthest sky, the most the furthest layer of the sky, very fragile sky, where where only like insects and vultures live. And it's really beautiful to see how he is also using this. The perspectives is almost like a hole that you see the next layer in different channels. And of course, all these layers, they exist simultaneously, and they are part of the daily lives of every person. So José is a fascinating artist because he's also making visible the shamanic experience and knowledge. So there are different drawings, like the shapiri, the spirits coming down to the collective houses through their shiny paths. You remember that Claudius, for instance, draw the picture of the child. Mythological different drawings. Also interesting that the shapiri in the Yanomami culture have either man or animal features. So they can be depicted in both ways, and there are all these double images of everything that exists. And you can also have shapiris of forest, of plants, of rivers, of trees. So these are different stories that in a way José is encapsulating this knowledge and transmitting them through his drawings. So the rivers, the shapiri, the bad spirits, the good spirits. And this is also a film that was in the exhibition. It's called The Tree of Dreams, which is, as you know, probably may know, the dream is a very important dimension for the Yanomami people. It's not something considered, as we do, kind of a repressed individual conscience, but it's really part of the daily experience, and it has the same importance as the daily life, and it's used by the shamans to really access different worlds and different knowledges, and also used by the community collective to prepare their routine and their experiences. So it's a very important aspect of the Yanomami cosmovision, and in this case it's a film about the origins of dream, the tree that blooms, and when it blooms it generates the dreams. If that tree doesn't exist, the dreams would also did not exist. So it's a very beautiful film, also done by Morzeniel and Aida and Admar. And then just to continue and almost end, this is another interesting artist from the Yanomami region, which is Jerónimo Hakinhiwe. He's a Venezuelan Yanomami, not a Brazilian Yanomami. I think you may know that the Yanomami just lived in the frontier between Venezuela and Brazil, but since it's a chain of mountains, part of them descended to Venezuela and the other part was descended to Brazil. They in a way separated. Some of them speak different languages. It's not a very even the idea of the Yanomami themselves is an artificial idea. But Jerónimo lives in the Venezuelan side of the Yanomami territory and is depicting, you can think of, the pink forest, but it's very interesting because he's depicting traditional knowledge and traditional drawing, but is very important for working with this different kind of drawings. They are not illustrative in a way of a story, but it's connected to the marks that you have on the body paint that relates to the Shapiri experience. So some of his very interesting drawings are interpretation of those body paints that connects that person to its own Shapiri and its own spirituality. And he's doing that on paper and printing that on paper that he produces himself in the territory, and really reviving that tradition in a completely different perspective. So you have, these different, very graphic representations. They are not abstract at all. They're very concrete and very specific and very connected to a knowledge and a spiritual tradition. Excuse me. Yeah, so this is, I think the exhibition was here at the Shed. I don't know if you had the chance to see it, but it was, what I've tried to do also is really how to make all these multiple perspectives live together in dialogue in the same space without creating a hierarchy, and also without creating a chronology, really making it multiple. And, I think what Claudio was trying to achieve in terms of translating the Yanomami perspective to a non-indigenous audience has very interesting relation with what Joseca is doing in the Yanomami territory to translate the shamanic knowledge into his drawings, and also what she was doing with photography in the daily life of the Yanomami has a strong relation with the Juana. So it was really how to blend all these multiple perspectives within the same space, within the same story, and not to create a linear or an oppositional situation. I think it's also very interesting to think about, and this is Claudia and the other artists when we came for the opening here in New York in February. But I think also what's interesting in terms of this idea of real communities, fictional realism. I mean, first the idea that realism, we're thinking about magic realism in Latin America and how it's different when we're talking about indigenous realism. If we consider an indigenous perspective, the whole idea of realism has to change, because there are many different dimensions of the world that we don't see, that exist, they're present. They're not really encompassed by the idea that we have when we try to define what real and realism can be. So in a way, I was thinking these days about the magic realism and thing. Maybe this is a kind of a repressed indigenous colonial legacy it's reviving in literature. But what I find interesting is really how Claudio also is being incorporated in the Yanomami cosmology and society, actually, because she's now referred to, because of her trajectory of fight, she's now referred to by the Yanomami as a mother. They call her mother, and she calls them sons when they meet and when they greet. So it's really interesting to think about, someone coming from a completely different geographical perspective, from another social group that was exterminated, just crossing the entire world, go into the Amazonian, being then incorporated by the Yanomami as their own people and their own blood. The Yanomami have a very interesting relation with, the idea of territorial and ancestrality, because they don't refer to themselves as someone that's being a semi-nomadic people. They don't refer to themselves as coming from a certain genealogy or a certain territory. When you move, your name changes and your community changes, and your origins and your social relations changes with you. So it's really interesting to think that, when Claudia is entering that relation, in a way she's moving this and being really incorporated and by the Yanomami being considered part of their own people. I think it's a very optimistic, paradoxical, and interesting outcome of this bond and relationship that can make us think a lot about the way we also think about our own ancestralities. So, I think this is it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosângela. Yeah, I'd like to open for the questions. Rosângela, I would like to hear more about how you perceive the otherness in your works, especially when you were talking about maps, but we were talking about the relationship that you establish with others to build your works, especially Rio Tópico and the work in Mexico. And yeah, if
Wow. This is not very easy to answer. I think that there are so many levels, so many different ways of thinking about the otherness, like depending on the project I'm doing. And I think that the idea really diagrams and maps are ways of trying to understand where you have to be yourself, or to put yourself to understand what you are dealing, especially when you are not very familiar to a situation. And I like to say, for instance, in the case of the Rio Tópico, I will never forget, because for me, everything began when I was talking to Thyago about what I wanted to do was to understand and to know the city of Rio. Like, okay, I was living in Rio for so long, so many years, and I really didn't know the whole city. And then there is also this idea, like, well, from my a kind of an anxiety to understand, especially a city which is which is so complex like Rio, that okay, I am not from Rio. Came from Belo Horizonte, from Minas Gerais. But even if I was born in Rio, I think that I would have the same feeling that of how we say, the não pertencimento, huh? Non-belonging, because you don't understand, and there are so many rules that you needed to be you needed to understand to go and to walk around the city. And I think that I like the idea of being a stranger. And I think that in so many levels also, like, I'm not talking only about the otherness, or the aspect of being a stranger, only from a space perspective. No, in terms of time, really, also. Like like when I did the work, I dealt for a long time with the photos from the jail in São Paulo, photos that were done in the beginning of the 20th century. I felt, like, oh my goodness, what it means to be touching these photographs that have been done for being invisible, and then what right I have to reveal those photographs. And do I have the right of showing the other to a kind of a big public after so many years? And what can happen to these people, like, if I incorporate those photographs in my own archive, and in my own repertoire. And then, like, that's why I don't know how to but I think that because I feel most of the times when I'm doing these projects, I feel so a stranger, like, it's so deep, this feeling of And that I think that I need to learn different ways to deal with this. Each situation puts me in a different position, and I have to understand what it means. I don't know if I replied you.
Yeah. It's interesting thinking about how that what you say now could be connected with the challenge to work with archives and to work at the same time with memories that are belong to you, but there are other memories, some collective memories that belong to others. But at the moment that you start working with these memories, they maybe can become your memories as well.
Well, like when you are every time I need to or deal. There are two different things in my specific projects. Sometimes I deal with real archives that already exist. In some other projects, I construct something that emulate, like it's a kind of new archive. And but in both cases, I need to. It's important to understand what you are talking about, what you are dealing, what are these memories or the amnesias involved. Otherwise, it's just like I don't want to illustrate something with some images. I need to understand the depth of of the material I to work with that I'm working with, and but also there is this aspect that for me it's magic. It's I love to say that um, photographs they have the potion for being independent beings. They are like shapiris, isn't it? Because like when you disconnect the photographs from the references, they become kind of empty ghosts looking for something to come to interact. And then that's why there is this potion. When Derrida talks about the potion inside the archives, I see it when I see the photographs looking for a character to come inside. You know what I mean? And then it's fascinating because I feel involved with the in knowing. Oh my goodness, I have to know more about it, know what it means to be the existence of these ghosts looking for a place to rest. And at the same time, you have no clue about how these photographs um, um, remain there, especially in the projects I did with the photos done in jail, in the how these photographs, how these glass negatives survived, because they were destined to trash. Most of them, well, lots of them really were uh, put on trash because with the time they became a kind of blocks of glass, and then there was no way to save the most of the photographs. But yeah, I think it's delirium what I'm what I'm saying. Well, and but this is I think how it fascinates me a lot. Like the possibility of going deep in this strangeness and to understand what I can do in terms of visibility with being careful also. Like I don't want the idea of doing something that could destroy the nature of the of the archive. I, every time I when I do a specific work, I like to be together, not against. Like not proposing something that is completely out from that original context. See. Yeah.
Well, speaking about research, I would like to go to Thyago to thinking about together. How can you perceive the work as a curator together with an artist like Rosângela, for example? So I was wondering, to thinking about how you can see your work and how you can see the agents that a curator has with artists and to work together in a project that you used to do. As Rosângela mentioned, Hilltop, that you work together. You were talking about your work that you did with Claudio and all the Yanomami artists. It's a long question, but we can talk more about it.
I think the work of, in a way, that the curator is, as maybe because I come also from the publishing industry, I think I like to think a lot about similarities between curating and editor, which is someone that is looking at a certain material and trying to channel, to make it very visible, accessible, and in a way didactic, to make it clear and to transmit this knowledge to other person, in a way a translator from, two words or two ideas, but really how I work together on the one hand with the artist to, stimulate and try to activate more questions, more problems, or bring more ideas to the work, but also how I organize that thinking, help to organize that thinking, and to channel it, to make it accessible and readable to people that come from a different perspective or background, or that are not really following all the conversations and all the discussions we have had. It's really how to make that readable, that visible, and the more interesting possible. So it's, in a way, also for instance, when I'm working with archives, it's like an archive of like Claudia's. It took me a long time to look at these images and start to work with them because it's so complex, so many layers, so many questions about the visibility, but also, very complex questions, ethical questions, questions that are not absolutely visible, that I feel it takes, especially when you're working with archives, it takes a lot of time for you to really be able to see and to read the strengths of the archive until you can really organize that. And also, I feel the moment you organize it, in a way, it's already moving. So the moment you see things start to move. And I think this is when I was working with Claudia, that was very clear to me. This exhibition started in 2018 as a homage to Claudia and Davi and their, dialogue and fight. And, since the first start of the exhibition, before Bolsonaro, before pandemic, before Black Lives Matter, before, all the conversation on climate crisis. So the moment we had this on view, it just, I just saw many other things, and it just occurred to me so many other things, and the exhibition kept changing, and it's still changing. It's, I think we're here in New York. It's the 2 in Brazil, 5 in Europe. The eighth stop, yeah, and it actually will. So I've rewritten the wall text. I've reselected works. I've added a lot of new material. It's been really, really moving. I feel it as a moving being, and it will continue actually to travel to, after here it goes to 2 places in Mexico, to Colombia and to Chile, and then also, of course, the territorial relations that we have in each of these countries. It's one thing to show in Brazil, Claudia. It's another thing to show Claudia in Europe, in the UK, in the imperial history, and then is another thing to show in the colonies, and places where also there are indigenous conversations going on, their own questioning, their own problems. So it's, yeah, it's also, so it's in a way I feel the work is changing, and I like that it changes. I was talking to Davi when he was here, and I said, this will continue, the exhibition will continue to be shown for at least 2 years. My goal would be that it not only incorporates the knowledge of these institutions and countries, but also that, for instance, we can train during this time Yanomami people to become curators with me and start working on the show, and in a way take over it and start to reformulate it in a different perspective. So I feel it's like, how you really find ways to make the presentations, you study them so deeply and so truly that, you find ways to present them and also make them connect to the current situation of the world, to make sense of it.
Oh, thank you. I have one more question, but I would like to open for the public, for the audience. Does anyone would like to jump in for the first question? Yes, please. Yeah, can we have Nicole? Do we have a mic for? Yeah, okay.
Thank you. That was really lovely to hear both talks. I had a question more for Rosângela than for Thyago. I really appreciate that you've given a slice through your work, giving us a clear through line. I love it when artists do this kind of edit for us. But my question is also about editing within the works themselves. So what I noticed from the first project we talked about, the Tijuana project, is how clear and colorful the images are with minimum informational captioning, through to the more recent ones, which are done researched on the internet and which have a lot of captioning in excess and a lot of accompanying information. And so I wanted to ask you about your changed approach to seriality and aggregation and kind of quantity of maybe the ratio of information to image in your work from the late 90s through to now.
Wow. It's I think that I love the idea, this aspect of the seriality, yeah, serialidade. And this is something that I learned when I was doing in the early 90s with when I began working with ID card photographs that I found in Rio. That this, I think, was what happened to, to me, the feeling and the taste of dealing with this a huge amount of negatives and especially portraits of people that I will never know, I will never see again. I never had not even one opportunity of having someone recognized in one of my photographs. Everybody asks me that, and then if someone came, and then it's really a pity because it's like dealing with these ghosts, these gelatin ghosts, and I think that each project takes me to specific zone of organizing the collection or the compilation of images. I have, well, they're very different, like when I was, for instance, some of them are very economic in terms of the example you found was perfect because the idea in Tijuana, I needed to map 32 states, Mexican states in the photographs. And the decision was taken with every time together with the photographer. And then he didn't want to make 32 different photographs. He wanted to organize in groups because this is how he loves. He's a very good photographer for family portraits. And he likes it. And then I think that each project has this its own structure. And but I think that, for instance, in the case of Eduardo Cepeda's photographs, it was already so kitsch in terms of the imagery and this. It was really the first time I used a very colorful, a lot of color in the photos. Of course, the photos were not mine, but we worked together. We shared this authorship, and for me, it was if you think about the cleanliness aspect in the project, for me it was so unclean because it was so colorful. And then I think that things each project comes differently, and the idea, especially with the idea with this last projects done with photos and files, things that I found in internet. advertising of haute colonias around the world. And when you come inside and you begin researching in internet, for me it was impossible not to saturate the photographs in a kind of top level of, and also showing all the information that comes together with the photograph inside the photograph. From one side, it was a way of try to prevent myself of possible problems, because I give all the credits to all the photographers and to all the places where I captured the photographs from. But some people can complain. Okay, you have to pay. I don't pay anything to have these photographs downloaded and printed and framed. And it's risky, yes. But then the idea of creating something that is really dense, intense in terms of information, visual information, and transforming all the textual information in something, in visual information as well on top of the image. I couldn't avoid that. I think that I was compelled to work that way. Sometimes I think that, well, especially the Eau de Colonie project, I think there is a lot of information. It's tiring to look at the project, and then it's lots of people told me it's not a project for to install on a wall. I need to. I cannot come close enough to read everything, and it's exhausting to read. And then, okay, but you don't need to read the whole thing. But you have to understand that internet is like that, and the story, the history of the cannibalization of the Haute Cologne is something that is open to everybody in internet. And there are so many things that were not included in my timeline, and I could do double I could include perhaps a second layer in my timeline. It's well, but it's exhausting also. I agree, but I wanted to make something saturated in both cases. Yeah. I don't know if I replied.
No, I was going to say just a curiosity. You were talking about these images that, the portraits that get lost and you didn't find the people. In the Yanomami culture, they call the term for photography is utupa. And utupa is the same, is the same term they use for the inner soul of the person that leaves the body when the person is dreaming. Right. And sometimes if you don't know really how to dream, if you're not a master, if you're not a shaman, this utupa can leave your body, access different realities, and it doesn't come back, and it's just lost. And then you have to have a shaman to bring back your utupa, to recognize it and find it and bring it back. So in a way, I was thinking the photography, the portraits that are people in archives, images that you find all over the world. It's an interesting relation that those images are lost and maybe will never come back to reunite with their body.
You know that my first exhibition with Mário Cravo Neto in Centro Cultural Banco do Brasil in 2003, he came. We were sharing the same floor of CCBB, but I was occupying 4 rooms or 5 rooms, and he was occupying the 3 rooms at the end. And he came with his Pai de Santo. I don't know how to translate that.
I think it's better Pai de Santo.
Pai de Santo, yeah. And he came with his, it's the father, Pai de Santo. What is the father that, the spiritual father. And he came, and then they both came to me because they were, his spiritual father was kind of scared with how I could deal with so many dead people and in my works because of all these portraits. And then he told me, and he came and he was talking to me, and suddenly he evaluated the whole situation and in the day of the opening. And then he came, no, that's okay. They are, you are doing good things with them. They don't care about you. You can go ahead. He told that to me. And then, okay, my goodness, but at least I received a kind of a benediction from from the Pai de Santo, yeah.
This is interesting because also the Yanomami, in the Yanomami culture, usually when a person dies, you have to destroy everything that belongs to the person. So normally, an image from a person that has deceased cannot be shown again. And in this case, in a way, Davi Kopenawa works as a shaman. It was the same conversation I had with him. You know, how do we present the work of Claudia and the story, and keep using this work for the visibility of the Yanomami if there are people that have died.
But there is a delay that you cannot use, or you won't be able to use anymore if the person dies.
I think the traditional culture is whenever a person dies, everything that reminds and belongs to that person on earth has to be erased. Even the name is not pronounced anymore.
Right.
You have to destroy the tools, the hammock, erase the footsteps, clear the, where she hanged the hammock or him. So it's completely opposite from our society that, keep these objects of memory all the time. They really have to erase anything so that the spirit can ascend and they can relieve the suffering. So photography is a very problematic tool
The
for
Aboriginal
that.
in Australia, you cannot show photographs of the really Aboriginal if they are half caste, how they used to call them. If you are half caste or a quarter caste, you can. But if it's really an Aboriginal man, you cannot use the photograph. Even if exist, because they have lots of photographs in the files for different reasons, but you cannot publish that.
Yeah. I would like to know if anyone would like
I'd
more
like to enter into
questions.
this
Yes.
because it's interesting. Because Rosângela, when you were presenting the idea of the photograph as a floating signifier that has been removed from its trace, but there's been a lot of discussion in the last several decades trying to reverse that idea, making the argument that a photograph is always a relationship between the person taking the photo, the person being imaged, and the spectator. There's a grounded relationship. Which goes against the idea of the photograph as floating free, looking for anchor. And it seems to me that several of the examples that have just been presented, such as the person who came to you and said that how could you present these photographs of all these dead people, was essentially saying that same thing. There was a relationship between that dead person, the photographer. How can you go against? How do you negotiate that relationship after the fact? So what do we make? And I think I would even take this to Claudio's work. I mean, clearly she's thinking about a relationship between her camera, the people she's photographing, and the people that are going to look at the photographs. What kind of relationship might that be?
You were talking about the social contract, and between the photographer, and the people who were supposed or not to see these photographs. This is what you.
Yeah. Essentially, I suppose you can call it a contract. It's a tacit understanding. When somebody takes a photograph of me, there's an understanding or of you. There's an understanding of what's going to happen, right? There's a relationship. I don't know if it's a contract, but it's.
Yeah. No, it's because that's. I think that this is what I was talking in the beginning with Ana Luiza, that each project for each project, I have to establish my own rules, and not only for me in terms of ethical rules, but with the archives also, depending on the type of archive I am dealing with, or if I am constructing my own archives, which are the limits or which are the interests on gathering the photographs or the images from internet, whatever. And I think that every case, like I try to be. We could discuss each case separately. That's the point. Like for instance, for the photographs from jail, I always wanted to rescue things from inside the photographs, which were very well done, but we never knew the name of the photographer, but they had a very special quality because that specific photographer in the early 20th century, he was he had a kind of very high level of intimacy with the inmates he photographed. We could see it, it was visible. And what I wanted in that case, specifically talking about that series of tattoos in the bodies of the prisoners, what I wanted to do was to try to reveal this, this intimacy or this approach or this special relation between the photographer that I never knew the name and the inmates that I was not authorized to show the names. And then what I decided to do for that specific project was to take out from the context of the jail and deal with aspects of the humanity that was taken out from them. And then this was, this was a kind of parti pris, that I used for the project. And because I thought it was not fair to discuss or to reveal only the aspect of the inmate documentation inside the jail, and especially because trying to understand the reason of the existence of those photographs, they were nothing could be proven because there was no document at all related to that collection, special collection of glass negatives, because all the theories that from the 19th century that you could try to connect with that collection, they were already in trash. They were already too old. But on the other hand, people in jail, they went on doing systematically all these documentations of tattoos, and backs of the heads of the prisoners, profile, the double effigy profile, and so on. And this was part of what suggested me to be as very far from the system, because the system didn't know exactly what they are doing. Actually, these guys, the photographer, the guys who were organizing the documentation department in jail, and they had no idea about what they were doing. And then I went to the opposite. I tried to deal with something that was taken from them. They were deprived from that humanity. I don't know if I understood. Yeah, if I explained you how I decided to deal and how I could authorize myself to work with that material in particular.
So can I just ground this then in the conference's theme and ask you what the relationship is between fact and fiction in these projects? I mean, to what extent you're acknowledging narrative as a construction versus fact as something that, I mean, I don't want to answer this. what is the relationship between fact and fiction in your production? I would say the same thing about Claudio. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, just to complement in the case of Claudia, I think there was the dealing with these images is paradoxical. With her image is very paradoxical, but I think the let's say the guidance to do this was Davi for me. It was really to ask Davi. Well, in the first case, to access Claudia's archive, it took her a long time to really let me do the research on her archive. She was always saying, photography is not the most important thing I did in my life. I don't want to do an exhibition about photography. This is not what it's important to me. I think she clearly moved in the 70s, early 80s, from being a photographer and an artist to understanding the complexities of dealing with these images and the ethical implications that showing those images or not showing those images demanded from her. And it was, I think, because of her very close connection to Davi Kopenawa that they continue to understand that these are not artistic images only. These are essentially an opportunity to give visibility to the Yanomami people and to keep reinforcing their rights and their sovereignty. And all these images can only circulate in that context and be exhibited with that intention. And when I did the project, for me it was really important to ask Davi, how can we deal? Can we show those images? Do you think we cannot show these images? What images? He was really, since he's let's say the spokesperson for the Yanomami community, especially the people where Claudio was working, it was he that guided me through this and saying, and still today, every time I organize the show, I show him, we discuss, and he's, we shouldn't show this or should show that. But he is the one that says, no, this exhibition is really important for my people. It needs to continue. It needs to be shown. These people can be shown. And sometimes he says to me, because he told me that he wants to take the exhibition to Roraima, to his state, when the tour is done. But he said, if we take there some pictures, I'm going to take out some pictures. So I think there's a whole negotiation that we're still, going of what can be shown and what cannot be shown. And it's really, in this case, I think it's first up to the Yanomami to really decide what can be visible, and I think I'm entrusted, let's say that's the correct word, by them to make sure the exhibition is served for them as a platform. So this is why it's important to bring them every time we open the show to talk about what's going on in the region and the land, to really make, I think I learned from Claudia, in the 80s and during the fight, was the exhibition is just a pretext and a platform to open up the space in this world arena for these questions to be discussed. And I was mentioning to Jerónimo just before we started here, a very interesting development of that was that we closed the exhibition on Sunday, April 16th. And on the 18th, there was a huge United Nations forum on indigenous permanent issues held here in New York with indigenous from all over the world. So we managed to bring the Secretary General of the United Nations to the exhibition. He was going to stay 20 minutes. He stayed 1 hour and 40, spoke to Davi and everyone. And then they organized a special session of the forum inside of the show, and on April 18th, with indigenous from all over the planet, talking about their own situation and how that relates to the Yanomami and the exploitation of the territory, the problems of the big companies and etc. So it's really, I feel it's I understand photography as this very complex, paradoxical tool actually, and language in itself. But also specifically in the case of the Yanomami, which I think is different, for me, it's really how to make sure, the most important things around this exhibition is making it a voice and a platform for the Yanomami to speak for themselves. So.
Yes, gentlemen.
Just I mean, you've partly both answered this question in some way, but I want to ask about how do you see the role of the spectator for your works? Because Rosângela, you said especially when we were talking about biblioteca, but also with Topico the what colonie, this sort of like, well, if the spectator like looks a little closer and takes more time, and you talked about how it was tiring and um, overwhelming at times. So how do you expect the spectator to engage with the practice? Because it seems to me that it's sort of a more you're demanding a spectator that works as an agent, and as a very active, intervening of the work, and maybe think out Claudia or even think out the Yanomami images. They seem to me to be very narrative in the sense that like what you're expected to do when you're approaching the show or the photographs or the images is to understand, to sort of like pause and receive this knowledge or this cosmology that is there without doing much because we've done enough to stop doing it. Is that sort of like an accurate depiction of the spectator?
What you mean without doing much? Sure.
Well, I mean, like it's about understanding the Yanomami culture, and you said that you wanted to be a platform for them to communicate without trying to act on the knowledge that it's being imparted.
The spectator, you mean?
Yes. Whereas I see Rosângela more as like asking the spectator to participate in the creation of that knowledge.
Well,
I think well, maybe. Please.
no.
No, just thinking. I think if you present something that is clear and visible enough, I think there is no way that I may be imagining that there is no way that the spectator will be not involved on it. Because when you learn, your perception of the world changes, and that is in a way you transform politically, the relations that are there. But in the case of the exhibition, what I was trying to see is, because I mean, artistically speaking, of course, what I'm trying to say is, if we can, for us, non-indigenous, if we can see, I think maybe we depend a lot on seeing things to understand and to really, making sense of it. But if we can see this cosmovision, the complexity, the beauty, the fascinating structure and understanding of the world, I think our perspective of the world is radically changed, and this will immediately make you change. In the same sense that I've changed while working and studying on this exhibition, this will change. But of course, there are more direct ways. For instance, in the exhibition, we have QR codes for people to donate direct money if they want, or as I said, the proposition of the show and the public program. For instance, we had talks with LENAPE, people from New York, talking about their own experiences, their own violence in connection with the Yanomami or the United Nations Forum. We organized a series of activities around, to make people acknowledge, in the hopes that, learning and seeing and understanding will reinforce, will protect. It's the only way I think the protection will be achieved, is to don't let them become invisible, because I think the whole idea of the dictatorship in the 70s, when we're dealing with Amazonia, was this is a green continent, empty green land that we can exploit. And because all those indigenous people were invisible for such a long time in the centers of capitalism, I think they were completely erased. We don't really relate the humanitarian problem with, the economic consumption of the world. So it's I don't know exactly how the spectator will, again, I cannot really control that, but I feel each spectator, depending on their own background, will react in a different way. In the exhibition, my experiences, some people tried, some people, even in Brazil, when we opened the show and Bolsonaro was elected, some people were revolted. I remember there was a guy that just threw in the, we added a video of Bolsonaro saying, it was right after his election, and he was saying, I'm not going to demarcate any centimeter of land to indigenous people in Brazil, and the land is too big for the Yanomami. and they need to just buy cell phones and jeans. They want to be integrated in society and etc. And people were really mad and just throwing the, the hat.
Of course, there's agency in reception always, but I was asking more about like the narrative content of the image. There's a content that needs translation, and that Claudio is doing, and that I'm here doing with this image is a little bit. When you put petroleum jelly in the lens, is because you want to tell a specific story, or when you said this is not abstract art. This is a very specific. There's a very specific content that needs to be translated, and the spectator needs to understand that.
Hopefully, maybe he will understand different things. I've tried to, for instance, in the exhibition, I've tried to have the images and very open captions. It's really like you can experience the way I was seduced by Claudio's work was just looking at those fascinating images, and this is what got me interested in her. But I didn't really understand exactly what was going on. It was so beautiful, so interesting that I was attracted, and this led, when I was heading the department, to approach her and say I want to understand and see more, and but it's
Yeah, to give another example, in the case of Claudia's photographs, if you compare, for instance, the Instituto Moreira Salles, Fundação Cartier exhibition with the pavilion inside Inhotim, for instance, where you have a wonderful collection of Claudia's photographs, the absorption of the work is completely different, because the exhibitions are very different. And one of Thyago's exhibition has all the texts that help people to understand what is behind, and to know a little more about the cosmology. But even with all the explanations, the text and everything, it is, I don't know, 10% of the whole cosmology. Because the book, for instance, the book by Bruce Albert and David Copenau, is the Fall of the Sky. It's a book like that, and then you will not even understand the whole complexity. But Claudia's photographs, they open a door and a window to understand the beauty. But of course that the spectator becomes limited if he doesn't want to go a little deeper. In my case, it's the same, but I cannot control what will happen. And but because I cannot control, I play with the idea. Okay, you offer, the spectator, the viewer, know exactly how much time he will dedicate to a work. And then, I spent 1 year creating the biblioteca. And then it's funny because some people come around the tables, and then, okay, it's beautiful, it's very beautiful because it's colorful. They don't understand anything about the color code, but they go out and they understand, oh, she's a crazy woman who put 100 albums, and they come out from the exhibition furious because I don't allow them to open and to touch the albums. And then, and some people came to me to say, why do you lock the albums? Why am not able to open and to deal and to look at the photographs? And then, okay, it's my decision to do that. There are lots of other informations that I offer you. If you don't want to go to the drawers and look for text information, then you are not having everything that you can understand from the project. On the other side, like all these albums came from flea markets, and probably the person who was complaining that she was not able to open the albums, this could be probably a person that never put their feet in a flea market and had no idea that you can find amazing, beautiful albums in flea markets that you can buy. You can go and buy for yourself. isn't it? And then I don't know if it's and it's but it's part of the process, you know, like I like the idea of offering a lot, and I have no idea about the reception of how the viewer will really interact with the work. And I think that you can find special ways of helping more. You know, like there are some projects that I believe, for instance, some of my projects, they are more how to say they work better in a book format than installation format. And then I have to be very careful about what kind of display or what kind of solution I will be more effective for my projects. And but other things that aren't really, you know, like we cannot I learned also, you know, like not to expect a lot of things from the viewers, from the spectators, because I have a project, for instance, that a work that I love called the Magic Lantern, which it's a it's a series of photographs done, black and white photographs done in darkroom, analog process. And with the same negative, I construct 4 different images, just opening, just projecting a very strong light on top of the image and destroying the information, creating a kind of black holes on top of the image. And then I will never forget and it's a very long process on making these photographs and controlling the amount of light that I need to make the not to have something that even making the whole image almost disappearing in this black hole. And the idea of having black holes from different sizes, like consuming the image, from magically consuming the image. And then once and it takes a long time to make those photographs. And then the first time I showed this project in Portugal in an exhibition, and someone came to me and said, but you can do that with Photoshop so easily. And then, okay, but how I will reply to a person like that? And then, okay, listen, Photoshop is it's not my option. And the idea is something I can talk to you about the experience I had in the darkroom, but you will never share the experience I had in the darkroom, making and creating this slow process on destroying an image inside the darkroom. And then it was so fascinating for me. And so these are type of things that I can talk about it. I can share this information with you, but nobody will share the same experience that I had. Exactly like Claudia, nobody will understand exactly what she felt when she was doing the photographs inside the house, when she saw this big light coming, like transforming this boy like an angel. You know, I think that I always try to think about how she was feeling, you know, like to make these amazing portraits of people when they are dancing and under the how is the name of Yakuana, the powder, yeah. And this is something, and I would love to be there. You know, like I'm always trying to understand the feeling, the emotion of being sharing that specific moment with these guys, and make, especially being able to record that.
Yeah, I would like
Yeah, this is really, you know, like something powerful, but we will never share that. We can just how we say grasp, yeah,
Yeah.
just a little.
Yeah, I would like to wrap up this session just with a thought to offer with the audience, because we think about translation, we have to thinking about the art and education work, because it's a really powerful work in translation that will help make some connections and ideation between the artwork, the curator work, and the audience. So I would like to offer this reflection. We have to talk more. We have a cough there outside. And thank you very much for all of your thoughts, for sharing with you. Yeah.